Pixels.Ltd Episode 1 My Earliest Gaming Memories.
Featuring Dan Ibbertson from Slope's Game Room.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Guru Larry.
Hello, you.
And Timmy Mallett.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Samuel Victor and you're watching my new show. You must be very excited.
I'm so excited! I'm so scared!
Over the course of time, I'll be talking about all kinds of retro goodness from my childhood growing up in the 80s and 90s. In the future, I plan to cover movies, TV shows, music, comics, toys, and more, but my primary focus is always going to be retro video games.
Good. Let's play then.
So that you can find them easily, all gaming episodes will be under the name of Pixels.Ltd, and you've just stumbled across the first ever episode. Lucky you. It's hopefully the first of many, so genuinely welcome, and if you decide to stick around, thank you. You rock! In this episode, I'll be talking about some of my very earliest gaming memories, including the big three 8-bit microcomputers, the pretty random first computer that I was personally lumped with, the TV show that ruled the lives of all British 80s kids' school holidays, an 80s toy shop chain that the internet doesn't even remember, the games console so rare and obscure that for 30 years I thought I'd imagined it, and the really weird story of how that same practically unheard of games console was responsible both for saving the careers of ex-Atari employees and even directly securing the entire launch of Nintendo of America. It's an unbelievable story, and one that I have a weirdly vivid memory of. I'll be covering all that and more, including some neat 80s toys and other memories along the way to tickle you right in your nostalgia bone. You might even see some special guest appearances along the way. Ooh. So, about me. I'm a huge retro games fan and collector, and I can spend literally hours talking about this stuff, so friends of mine have been encouraging me to start this channel for ages now.
Just do it!
Of course, there are already many excellent retro gaming channels on the internet, and it's hard to find a way to make such videos without covering the same ground already laid out by others. But I've decided to cover games in a way that only I could. Not because I'm special in any way, mind you, but in that I'm going to be telling stories about how I first experienced these games in my childhood, and bringing my own personal perspective into it.
Story, Mr. Che? What story?
Well, all right. Just one story.
I was born in 1981, so I'm lucky enough to have lived through pretty much every major video game system, from the Atari 2600 and the 80s micros, through the glory days of the 90s to today. Naturally. 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 If you're just looking for straight-up documentary-style videos and rapid-fire facts, this may not be the series for you. But if you enjoy hearing stories about what gaming was like back in the day and what it meant to me and my friends, peppered with some proper retro history and little-known facts, then you might want to stick around, because I've got a lot to talk about.
Really? I hadn't noticed.
I always thought that if I were to make a retro gaming series, the first episode could only really be about one subject. The whole reason that I fell in love with gaming in the first place, and the main reason why I'm still so passionate about it today. Experiencing a certain game on a certain console for the first time at 9 years old in 1991.
I'm only 9 years old.
To many, this may seem like a trivial story, but to me, it's one of the landmark memories of my life. Other than a handful of obvious big life moments. It's one of the things from my past that I look back on the most fondly, and I feel has really shaped me as a person growing up. For people in my age group, it might seem an obvious or cliché gaming moment, and for people of a younger generation, it may seem silly or unimportant. But to 9-year-old me, this felt like a real earth-shattering, groundbreaking kind of thing. Life could have been very different, but then... It's one of those few moments that you can look back on and actually plot the exact second when your life was forever, irreversibly changed.
Hold on a minute, Samuel.
Oh, it's Dan from the incredible Slope's Game Room.
You said you were born in 1981, but you're talking about a game in 1991. I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
You're completely right, of course, mate. Maybe I should cover my very earliest gaming memories in this episode.
I personally had an Amstrad before my Mega Drive. Surely you had an 8-bit computer or console, right?
That's an interesting story, actually.
I can see it now. Pixels.Ltd, the complete history.
Something like that. Thanks, mate. If you're watching this video, chances are you already subscribed to Slope's Game Room, but if you don't, do yourself a favour and check it out. He's even got his own complete history beer. Cheers. Anyway, back to me. From Welsh and English heritage, I was born on the border between the two in Gloucester in October of 1981. Of course, I don't remember much from my first couple of years on this earth, but I do have a few memories from 1983 to about 87, things I watched on TV, toys my parents bought me, etc. A lot of retro gaming YouTubers think of that period as dark years in gaming, due to the infamous video games crash. Actually though, that was mostly a North American thing, and to most British people in the 80s we didn't really notice any change in the market, and actually had a pretty booming homegrown video games industry. In fact, we didn't even really call them video games, we called them computer games, because way more people owned home computers than games consoles at the time.
Microcomputers, the small personal ones that are selling like hotcakes nowadays.
Now I don't mean IBM-based PCs using Microsoft Windows or DOS. Those didn't become commonplace in most of my friends' homes till the mid-90s. No, I'm talking about early microcomputers, the kind that didn't have a mouse, often didn't have a disk drive or a hard disk, or even a graphical operating system, just a flashing cursor, a keyboard, and a cassette drive.
Oh, this is just an ordinary audio cassette.
Yes, it is. And you can play it on that ordinary-looking audio cassette recorder that's already plugged into the computer.
Oh, okay.
Viewers from around the world are probably familiar with the Commodore 64. It is, after all, the best-selling computer of all time. Here's the unit itself. A neat little unit, all built into the keyboard. You could plug it into a monitor or an external CRT television, and most people loaded software and games from the cassette drive.
Are you keeping up with the Commodore? 'Cause the Commodore is keeping up with you.
This name was usually shortened to C64, not to be confused with Nintendo's N64, of course, where the 64 stood for 64-bit architecture. All of these early microcomputers were strictly 8-bit systems, unless of course you listen to Bill Cosby.
Hi there. You know who I am.
Yeah, that's not aged well. The 64 in this case stands for 64 kilobytes of RAM, which is a pretty big step up from Commodore's less powerful Commodore 16 and VIC-20.
Gentlemen, move over for my friend Vic.
Even if you weren't alive at the time, you may well have heard of the C64 because they've recently released a plug-and-play mini version of it, which many YouTubers have already reviewed, so let's move on. This is the original model Commodore 64, launched in 1982 and often called the bread bin. It was very similar in design to the C16 and the VIC-20, but with markedly more powerful innards. A few years later, Commodore also released a sleeker, more modern-looking version called the C64C, which is technically almost identical and plays all the same software, but it looks more similar to the 16-bit computers like the Atari ST, the Acorn Archimedes, and Commodore's own Amiga range. They even have the same packaging, see? This one's a little yellow nowadays, but you get the point. For its time, the C64 is an awesome computer capable of impressive sprite-based colour graphics and fantastic sound with the SID chip.
1, 2, 3.
Outrun.
However, in the 80s, I didn't own one of these. And despite how successful they were in other parts of the world,
never forget it's the world's biggest selling home computer.
In the UK, I only ever met one kid who owned one, and I eventually bought it off him when he got bored of it in the 90s, but maybe that's a story for another episode. Commodore was an American company through and through, although the excellent work at Commodore UK would eventually see their Amiga range absolutely dominate UK households in the late 80s and early 90s with the 500, 600 and 1200 respectively, in brightly coloured bundles, like this. But from my limited experience at least, in the majority of the 80s, whilst Commodore 64 was absolutely ubiquitous across the pond, most people in the UK were actually more interested in two British-made microcomputers. The Spectrum, from Sir Clive Sinclair, and the Amstrad, from Lord Alan Sugar.
You're fired.
Like the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum also launched in 1982, and again, like Commodore, Sinclair had already launched several less powerful computers, but as with the C64, they really knocked it out of the park with the Spectrum. Not quite as powerful as the Commodore, it was however significantly cheaper and performed very similar tasks. Its affordability combined with the comparative ease of programming is credited with launching both the UK's IT and video games development industries.
It encouraged a lot of people to start programming games, and you didn't need a large budget. You could do it in your bedroom all yourself over a couple of months, and some people made a lot of money out of it.
The base model looked like this. Again, a computer built into its own keyboard, plugging into your TV and requiring a cassette deck to load most of its software. To cut costs, it doesn't have a proper keyboard, just these spongy rubber keys, but they do the job, and for many people, it's pretty nostalgic. There were 16 and 48 kilobyte versions, but most people got the 48K as it played the best games. In the UK, it was the biggest selling microcomputer of the day, and therefore had the biggest games library of all three main systems. The Amstrad CPC 464 launched 2 years later in 1984. Of course, being only 1 or 2 years old when the Amstrad launched, it seems to me like the Speccy, CPC and the C64 just always existed. But it's worth pointing out the other systems had the head start, whilst the Amstrad had the advantage of slightly newer technology. CPC stood for Colour Personal Computer, and Amstrad stood for Alan Michael Sugar Trading Limited, and if you didn't know that, you're fired. Sorry. The CPC was more expensive than the Spectrum, but was competitively priced with the C64, and was marketed to parents in the UK as the best all-round complete computing experience. It came with a cassette drive built in, a proper keyboard, and a numerical keypad, only usually seen on more expensive and serious business machines. The inclusion of both these features meant that it was pretty huge. Check out this beast!
Macho, macho man, yeah! I've got to be a macho man!
Adding to that substantial, serious feel was the fact that this machine didn't just plug into your TV, but required its own, sharper, higher quality, dedicated monitor included in the price. You could buy a green screen monochrome version, or splash out an extra £100 or so for a full colour upgrade. Like the C64, it had 64 kilobytes of RAM, and very impressive graphical capabilities if software was programmed to take advantage of its features, although in reality, sadly often games were just near identical ports of the less powerful Spectrum version. Whilst the Spectrum outsold the Amstrad, most of my school friends seemed to have CPCs. I don't know whether this was because I went to a fairly middle-class school, or just because the computer was a couple of years newer and therefore more fashionable for kids who were exactly my age. The Commodore, Spectrum and Amstrad computers all had various upgraded models with 128K. Whilst Commodore shifted focus to its Amiga range to compete with Atari's ST, Amstrad and Sinclair continued to duke it out.
I was originally supposed to come running up that stage there and talk to you from a great height. I'll leave that free, in case Sir Clive comes along.
With Lord Sugar eventually buying Sir Clive's computer business out completely, but continuing to release Spectrum-branded computers to capitalise on the brand's successes.
Sugar has bought Clive Sinclair's company.
We sold him our existing, and just our existing, computer range, and we sold him the right to use the Sinclair name.
The new Amstrad-made Spectrums included the Plus 2 range, all of which included a proper keyboard and a tape deck built in, and looked more similar to the hulking beast of the CPC.
This is the Sinclair ZX Spectrum Plus 2. It's a fully operational computer with 128K memory and a light gun that fires armour-piercing shells.
This is the Plus 2A in black, which is probably my favourite looking of all the Spectrum models. Apologies to Sinclair purists.
Right now, the only jerk I see is you.
It's worth noting also that all of these systems had optional disk drives, cartridges and other media like Sinclair's microdrives, and some even had variations with disk drives built into the computers themselves instead of cassettes. But honestly, for the average home user, none of these formats ever really took off, as cassettes were much cheaper, with many games available at pocket money prices like just $1.99 each, not to mention free demo tapes on magazines, and the ability to use home stereos to pirate games and copy them between friends.
Being a pirate is a wretched thing.
In the 80s, floppy disks were expensive, and cartridges massively more so, which saw an almost immediate death for cartridge-only systems like Commodore's GS and Amstrad's GX4000, released in 1990 and 1991 respectively. Of course, Nintendo, Sega and Atari all had reasonably successful cartridge-based systems available throughout the 1980s, and I'll cover these in the second episode.
Do us a favour, plug me into a Sega. Now whack on the patches and I'll get back to sleep.
But despite these dedicated consoles, plenty of other home computers like the Dragon 32, the TI-99 4A...
This is the one.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Huxtable. and the early growth of the big 3 16-bit computers, the ST, the Archimedes, and the Amiga, it's almost 100% certainty that if you were a British gamer growing up in the early 80s, you either owned a Spectrum, an Amstrad, or a C64. The only other computer you were likely to encounter was a Model A or B BBC Micro. I'm not going to hold one up because A, I don't own one, and B, they are huge and metal. They looked like this, and if you went to school in Britain in the 80s, you almost certainly recognised the black and beige box with red function keys and a little owl in the corner. Whilst they were actually made by Acorn, they were branded as BBC computers because they were marketed by the British Broadcasting Corporation, yes, the telly people, to teach computing to children, with various television shows usually captured on VHS tapes to be used in classrooms in schools around the country. The BBCs were powerful and ruggedly built computers, but the high price combined with a focus on educational software and a lack of actual games meant that although you almost certainly had several of these at your school, you were pretty unlikely to actually see one outside of the classroom. So which of all these microcomputers did I own growing up, I hear you ask? Sadly, none of them.
It wasn't supposed to be this way.
My father was a teacher, and in the 1970s, before I was born, became convinced that computers were the way of the future, and if he could learn about them early on, that would give him a distinct advantage over other teachers, and when he had kids, i.e. me, he could teach them computing and set them up for better job prospects in the future. For the 1970s, that was a pretty forward-thinking thing to do, and I admire him for that. Thanks, Dad. Around 1980, before I was born, my mum and Dad bought a CBM PET 4016 and then upgraded it to an 8032. It was an absolutely huge metal monstrosity of a computer with built-in green screen monitor. Searching online suggests the original release price of the computer was over $900 and $300 for the upgrades, which, allowing for inflation today, is nearly $5,000. However, my dad's pretty sure he didn't pay quite that much. Whatever it costs, my parents definitely were not rich, so that would have been a massive, massive expense for them.
The PET computer. Now this one costs a bit more, it's £695, but you can see why. It's all in one piece, it's more sophisticated, it can remember much more than the other one.
Must have really annoyed my dad when 3 or 4 years later, vastly more powerful computers were available for a fraction of the price. But hey, those few years head start were well worth it and meant he got a promotion and taught computers at the school where he worked. The name PET stands for Personal Electronic Transactor, and CBM stands for Commodore Business Machines, and this computer's base technology would eventually evolve into what became the C64. They used the same adapted version of Microsoft's BASIC programming language, and the same PETSCII character set, meaning that any skills that my dad taught me on my computer at home would be directly transferable to newer machines.
Soon you'll be able to link them to the telephone system and the GPO's view data bank. And that'll be good news for us housewives, because without leaving our kitchen, we'll be able to trace and find the cheapest prices in town via our computer.
Sadly though, from a gaming perspective, the PET was vastly underpowered. Unlike the green screen monitor on the cheaper version of the Amstrad, which was fine for gaming, essentially just like playing on a black and white monitor, the monitor on the PET was literally monochrome. Only one shade of green existed, and that is it. Making matters worse was the fact that there were no hardware sprites, meaning that graphics were basically non-existent. You could only move around text and a small variety of fixed shapes, and on a character-by-character basis with no pixel-by-pixel accuracy. So any kind of nicely drawn graphics was completely impossible, as was any kind of smooth movement. There was also no sound really to speak of, other than a single beeper.
Yet another example of space-age technology.
By the late 80s, when I was old enough to understand computers and games, the 1 MHz processor was slow, and 32K memory, although huge for the PET range, was severely limited compared to modern computers of the time. Unlike the vast majority of retro gaming YouTubers who grew up in the 80s, I didn't actually play many video games in the first decade of my life. My dad saw little reason to upgrade our home computer, as it was still more than good enough to teach me to program and use it for schoolwork.
Obviously they are very attractive at present to schools, colleges, small companies as well.
Truth be told, he didn't really approve of video games very much, as he thought they would distract me from actually learning anything.
Officials say they are responding to complaints from parents that children have skipped school or stolen money to play the games.
Making kids' minds like vegetables, talk about them out on the street smoking pot.
To be fair, maybe he had a point. Once I started gaming, I never really stopped.
Once you pop, you can stop.
But honestly, did I feel like I was missing out by not having computer games? Not really, at the time. I was more into cartoon TV shows like Ghostbusters,
Who you gonna call?
Transformers, and the Turtles.
Heroes in a half shell, turtle power.
And movies like Ghostbusters.
Hey, anybody see a ghost?
They catch the ghost that won't stay dead.
Transformers.
You got the touch.
And the Turtles.
Excellent.
And playing with toys like Ghostbusters, Transformers, and Turtles. And yes, these are of course Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Couldn't have any of that scary ninja stuff for British kids in the 80s now, could we?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Splinter taught them to be ninja teens. He's a radical rat. Yo, DJ! Bring that beat back. Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. Splinter taught them to be fighting teens. He's a radical rat.
It's not that I didn't know video games existed, of course. Kids in my school would talk about them and I would listen and join in with the conversations. I worked out fairly quickly that games were considered cool and I should learn about them to fit in. Even when very young, my school friends would talk about their cool older brothers or cousins games. Sometimes I would visit friends' houses and experience an Amstrad or a Spectrum myself briefly. Though it wasn't that much fun because I had no experience playing games, so of course I was pretty terrible at them and I died in a matter of seconds before I had to pass the joystick along.
On the left-hand side.
To be honest, it was a rare occasion for me to go around a friend's house anyway. I had friends at school, but my parents were quite protective of me and didn't just let me play on the streets or parks or roam house to house like many of the parents did at the time. If I was to visit a friend's house, it had to be an arranged thing, so my parents knew who their parents were, where their house was, and would have to drop me off and pick me up at pre-organised times, so it became more of a special occasion thing than an everyday occurrence. Not that I minded, I had these awesome things to play with. None of the video games I played at friends' houses during these early years made that big an impression on me. I vaguely remember playing Horace Goes Skiing on the Spectrum and Roland on the Ropes on the Amstrad. Sure, now I understand that those games are classics and many people love them, but at the time I thought they were fun for a few minutes, but I admit I didn't really get it yet.
I do not understand this input. What language are you speaking, Oscar? Parlez-vous français? T'as du dansk? Habla español?
Weirdly, one of the clearest childhood memories I have of seeing a video game at a friend's house is one of the most obscure games consoles ever. So obscure, in fact, that for years I thought I might have actually imagined it. It was at my mate Thomas's birthday party, and it was the only time I ever went to his house. I remember the morning of the party, I'd watched an episode of Whack-A-Day with Timmy Mallet, a pretty seminal kids show that ran from 1985 through to 92.
It's Whack-A-Day, no school today, here's what you've got to do. Forget the postman, download to see what we've got for you.
The whack part of Whack-A-Day stood for Wide Awake Club, which started in 1984 on Saturday mornings, and the a day part of the name was because it was the weekday spin-off version, which actually became more popular than the Saturday morning show that spawned it, and it was shown every weekday morning of every school holiday for the majority of my childhood. Timmy Mallet presented the show and was sometimes joined by Michaela Strachan from The Really Wild Show and Springwatch. The indie band Scouting for Girls immortalised Michaela and the show in a hidden track. Masturbation jokes. Classy.
Mr. Mallet? What? Mr. Mallet?
Yes, Pinky, yes, what?
I'm utterly pink!
Weirdly enough, the Wide Awake Club also contained a parody of itself called the Sound Asleep Club, starring Mike Myers in his first ever TV job.
Sound asleep.
Here's some earrings made out of spoons.
An early morning British kids TV show seems a weird starting place for the major Hollywood star, of course nowadays known for Wayne's World.
It's Wayne's World! Wayne's World!
Austin Powers.
Yeah, baby!
And Shrek.
Somebody.
Enough!
Now it's time for our cookery spot. Today we'll be showing you how to make a glass of water.
The other half of the Sound Asleep Club was Neil Malarkey, who later appeared as the guy giving Austin Powers back his belongings when they unfreeze him.
One Swedish-made penis enlarger pump.
Honestly, it's not mine. Again, sorry. When I was growing up, TV stations didn't run 24 hours a day. They would start in the morning and end at night with dead air in between, usually showing a simple title card saying when TV would start again and what they'd be showing. ITV started at 9:30 every morning However, in 1983, a small company called TVAM got the rights to broadcast the channel from 6 a.m. to 9:25, ready to show some adverts and swap over to ITV at past. They continued every morning from 83 to 92, when the slot was sold to GMTV, who you might remember from Mr. Motivator and Power Rangers.
Power Rangers now! Go, 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 go!
This lasted till 2009, when ITV finally switched to 24 hours. But before GMTV, we had TVAM, and it was brilliant. I have to say that because my mum was on it. She was a poet, and when I was growing up, her poetry was often in magazines, newspapers, on the radio, and occasionally on TVAM. Pretty awesome. And if I had boiled egg and soldiers growing up, they were often out of our TVAM egg cups that she was given. Plenty of well-known faces got their starts with TVAM, including Ulrika Johnson, Lorraine Kelly.
Do you think you'd be a good dad?
Yes, let's work on it.
Oh, what are you doing tonight?
And Chris Evans.
No, you're a lot heavier than you look.
I had a big breakfast.
No, not that Chris Evans. This Chris Evans.
Well, it's here. It's once again the big breakfast. Chris Evans. No, you're a lot heavier than you look.
I had a big breakfast.
It all happened before the proper ITV presenters were awake, so they could get away with anarchic stuff like Roland Rap and hitting children on the head with a giant mallet. You may wonder what all this has to do with the computer game. It's important because the episode I remember watching that morning means I can pinpoint exactly when I saw that very obscure computer game in the wild. Now, it is fair to say that Whack-A-Day is one of those shows that you maybe have to have been just the right age to understand. I certainly know that many parents and teachers found Timmy Mallet pretty annoying, with his forced constant happiness, in-your-face humour, and turned-up-to-11 style. But kids at the time loved him, myself included. Whenever I went on holiday, I could tell fellow wide-awakers by doing a whack-a-wave and getting one back. Timmy inspired fashion trends like neon colours, Bermuda shorts, Twin Peaks, non-matching socks, and having one trouser leg rolled up. He even had hit singles, reaching #1 in the charts with Bomb Ballerina, produced by Andrew Lloyd Webber, releasing songs like
Oh yeah!
and
Oh yeah!
and performing as MC Mallet and Del Costa. To me and the other kids in my class, Timmy was a hero, a legend, and we'd all watch the shows and talk about them. I remember talking to one of my friends about that morning's show at the party. Timmy was in Scotland, trying to catch the Whack Ness monster.
Mr. Mallet, are we on YouTube? Yes, we are, Pinky Punky. We're on Pixels.Ltd.
Oh my god, it's only Timmy Mallet and Pinky Punky!
Oh, I'm so excited, I want to go to the toilet. I'm sure you do, but not right now, because people are watching.
Hi Timmy, we were just talking about you.
Mr. Mallet! Yes, I know.
Hi Pinky. Hi Timmy.
Aha! Greetings, Sam.
I was just wondering, do you remember hunting for the Whack Ness monster?
The Whack Ness monster? Yes, I remember the Whack Ness monster. That was in the summer of 1988. And we were filming just up here. It was really exciting because, if I'm not mistaken, that was the time of Thomas's 7th birthday.
That's right.
Oh, that was exciting. Yes, it was, Pinky Punky. Because if you remember, Thomas got for his birthday a really brilliant, utterly brilliant computer game.
It was utterly something, alright. Not sure about brilliant, but we'll get to that in a minute. Thank you so much, Mr. Mallet.
Have a brilliant day. Thanks for watching. Blah!
You too. Trust me, 80s me is freaking out right now. Actually, sod it, can we take a minute?
Oh yeah!
Enough. So, summer holidays of 1988 would make me exactly 6 years old. Amazing that I can picture that particular video game at that children's party 30 years ago so clearly. The reason it stuck with me is because I was pretty confused about the game in question. I remember people huddled around a TV and shooting at it with a light gun, but It wasn't your typical video games console or microcomputer, but instead, they were playing on a VHS tape through a VCR with proper full motion video of aeroplanes. Kind of looked like Top Gun, but lower budget and without the homoerotic undertones. The fact that this was apparently a video game confused me no end at the time, as I couldn't fathom how anything on a standard VCR could be the slightest bit interactive. Later, that same summer holidays, I saw the very same VHS-based console for sale in my local Merritt's newsagents, and I studied the box, fascinated. There was a kid shooting a light gun at video footage of an aeroplane with a VHS player just below. They only had one on the shelf, and the next time I went back in about a week later it had been sold, and I never heard of that console again. Quick aside about Merritt's News. It was a chain of newsagents that doesn't exist anymore, and they appeared to have possibly only existed in Gloucestershire and Herefordshire and seemingly went out of business before the internet really took off. Almost nothing comes up when you Google search for them, but I did find this one single photograph of a branch in Cinderford, Gloucestershire, taken in 1985 by John Powell. Although this isn't the branch I went to, it is extremely reminiscent of it. The green signs with the white writing in that plain bold font bring back so many memories. Typically, Merritt stores would have large triangular displays like these with many magazines in one aisle and greetings cards and stationery in another. They usually contained a tobacconist as well, and weirdly sold fireworks and Christmas crackers in the same section. Maybe it was just things that were considered unsafe. There would also always be a large toy section, with boxes seemingly randomly piled to the ceiling. You can see some evidence of that here. I gravitated towards these sections like there was a strong magnet pulling me towards them. It was always like an Aladdin's cave, stuffed with a random selection of obscure, exotic toys that you wouldn't usually find in mainstream toy shops, as seemingly they only bought toys from warehouse clearances and stuff other shops couldn't sell. Much of the stuff was clearly imported from other countries and often had foreign languages on the labels, but they also had lots of cool stuff from America, from franchises that might not have made it to British TV or cinema yet.
Or is Fort Carium safe with Brave Star? Only you know the answer.
Bucky! Captain Bucky O'Hare! He goes when an ordinary rabbit would dare.
New Bucky O'Hare action figures sold separately.
Toxic Crusaders! Toxic Crusaders!
Hideously deformed action figures and toxic waste, each sold separately.
It was kind of like a time portal of fascinating toys from both past and future.
The powers in your mind to shape the planet to conquer time.
They were always at clearance prices, and if you saw something you wanted, you had to buy it right away because they probably wouldn't be there next week. As I was just 6 years old and I'd only seen this console twice, for years I thought I must have imagined it or misunderstood something about it. Maybe it was a figment of my imagination.
I'm Figment! I'm a dragon! Oh golly double G! Just use the magic in your mind! I'm Figment! That's me!
How could a console based on VHS tapes exist? It didn't help that the light gun I remembered in my head looked exactly the same as the NES one, but in grey rather than orange. I found out years later that there was actually a pretty common grey variation of the NES light gun released in America.
Hold right there.
Colt 45, semi-automatic. Play-Doh.
So I thought I'd misremembered somehow and got the 8-bit Nintendo confused with a VCR. The cartridge mechanism certainly looks a bit like a video player, and NES games are nearly VHS size.
Now, Samuel, you can't just come on YouTube and call it a NES. You'll break the internet, my friend.
Ah yeah, thanks Dan. As it's my first video, apparently it's customary on YouTube to stop right here and point out that I'm British, and therefore I don't call this a NES, or an NES, or a Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a NES.
The NES.
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 Also, I call him Yoshi, not Yoshi.
Yoshi. Yoshi.
Yoshi. Yoshi.
Yoshi.
Yoshi.
Yoshi.
Yoshi. Yoshi. Yoshi. Yoshi is
Mario, not Mario.
Super Mario.
Super Mario. Super Mario.
Mario Land.
Mario Kart.
Mario World.
Mario Paint.
Mario. Mario.
Mario.
Mario.
Mario.
Mario.
Mario.
Mario.
Mario. Mario.
Mario.
Mario. Mario.
Mario.
Mario. Mario.
Mario.
Mario.
Mario cookies.
And it's Mario Brothers.
Super Mario Brothers.
Mario Brothers.
Mario Brothers.
Mario Brothers.
Mario Brothers.
Mario Brothers.
Super Mario Brothers.
Or at a push, Dross. Sorry, bros. Anyway, that weird VHS console. Nearly 30 years later, after 3 decades, I was watching an excellent YouTube video about the worst-selling consoles ever by the gaming legend that is Guru Larry Bundy Jr.
Hello, you.
Oh, hi, Larry. I was just talking about you.
You were? Oh, what have I done this time?
I was talking about a vague memory I had of a VHS-based light gun console from the 80s.
Ah, you mean the Action Max.
Exactly. Watching Larry's video, I was absolutely floored when he talked about the Action Max, which looked like the exact VHS-based console and grey light gun that I remembered from when I was 6 years old.
Action Max for your VCR. Yeah!
Quickly Google searching the bloody thing found the box art, and I was amazed to find that my memory of seeing the box in Merritt's had been spot on. Also, the Action Max was made by Worlds of Wonder Toys, the same company that made Teddy Ruxpin.
Teddy Ruxpin. He talks, sings and tells stories. Soon everyone becomes his friend.
The Merritt's near my house also had a post office where my mum would go to cash her child benefit gyro before taking me shopping, and I clearly remember the animatronic Teddy Ruxpin singing songs at me while I was about 3 years old. He sang songs about how he wanted to be my friend and come home with me. Yeah, that's enough of that. As a young kid who still at least partially believed that toys were alive, kinda still do if I'm honest.
Now available at stores everywhere.
I knew we could never afford the expensive bear, and I felt pretty guilty knowing I had to leave the store without taking him home. Marketing a toy to young kids playing on their emotions of guilt and craving friendship and loyalty was a pretty messed up thing to do in my opinion.
Hi, my name is Teddy Ruxpin. Can you and I be friends? Yeah. I really enjoy talking to people.
Although pretty common in the 1980s with franchises like the Cabbage Patch Kids.
Each doll is different and you adopt them.
You're a pal. You're the only one. I love you.
Get Along Gang.
Whenever I cry,
Mom will be here soon, Katie.
Make a blue sky. Now that's why I love you, Montgomery.
And the Care Bears.
Care Bears love to share their feelings with you.
Next.
You can play in a caring way.
It was brilliantly parodied in 1988 by Chucky in the movie Child's Play.
Hi, I'm Oscar, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho! Wow!
I wanted to write something that was a dark, satirical look about the world of children's marketing.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
I love Chucky. But then again, I also love Care Bears and the Get Along Gang.
When I forget how to smile, we talk for a while. Now that's why I love you, Montgomery.
I don't care if they were invented as evil marketing ploys to emotionally guilt me into begging my parents to spend all of their money. They're so darn cute, that.
Oi! Stop playing with your teddy bears there and get back to the video games.
Sorry. Anyway, I'm pretty bloody grateful to Guru Larry for making the video showing the Action Max so I could finally scratch the itch of a frustrating half memory from 30 odd years ago that I thought I'd never be able to figure out. And guess what? Thanks to the lovely people at eBay, I've only gone and bloody got one.
Here we go!
And look, it's just like 6-year-old me remembered. There's the boy, shooting at the TV, planes on the screen, and a VHS player. And look, the light gun really does look like a grey Nintendo Zapper. Now, considering the console launched just a year after the NES launched in America, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the Action Max ripped off Nintendo's design without permission. But not at all. In fact, if it wasn't for World of Wonder Toys, the Big N's 8-bit system may not have even succeeded in the Western market at all. Earlier, I talked about how the 1983 video game crash didn't really affect us in the UK, but of course in America it was huge, meaning console and games manufacturers going out of business left, right and centre. Worlds of Wonder, on the other hand, were a fast-growing American company developing high-tech toys with their hugely successful laser tag guns, and of course animatronic toys like Teddy Ruxpin, Grubby, Mother Goose, Snoopy, Mickey Mouse, Goofy and the Muppet Babies. They happily hired most of the employees who'd lost their jobs at Atari, and after the soft launch in 1985, In 1986, when Nintendo were having trouble getting big toy stores like Toys R Us and Sears to sell their new console countrywide, they enlisted the help of Worlds of Wonder. We all know the story of Rob the Robot, sneakily used to disguise the video game nature of the NES. But what is far less known is that for the first year, it was Worlds of Wonder who agreed to distribute the console and market it as their new high-tech product. They went as far as to tell stores that if they wanted to sell Teddy Ruxpin, the #1 toy for 2 years in a row, they also had to sell the NES in their shops, and even specified that the retailers had to buy at least 500 consoles to guarantee them enough shelf space. This still lasted for the first year of distribution in North America, and Nintendo gave Worlds of Wonder 10% of all NES sales in the region for that time period. It's little wonder that a year later, when Nintendo of America rescinded the deal, that Worlds of Wonder would want to make their own console, designed and manufactured by ex-Atari employees, and probably with technical advice from Nintendo on how to adapt their laser tag light gun tech to work with TVs, like NES's Zapper and Duck Hunt.
A fat lot of good that did them, though. It's been reported that only 10,000 Action Max consoles were ever sold. This may be only American figures, but barely any other countries even got the thing, due to them not paying to translate the films used in the games.
Which makes it even more amazing that one of my very first gaming memories is of such a rare and unheard of system.
Oh, definitely. So, now you've finally got one, is it actually worth playing then?
No, of course it bloody isn't. It's one of the most terrible things I've ever played in my life. In fact, played is an exaggeration. At least with the Laserdisc or CD-ROM FMV games, the footage can skip to different scenes to add at least a tiny bit of interactivity.
Please save me! The cage is locked with a key.
With a VHS, just plays from start to finish and it's exactly the same each time. There were only 5 games ever released for the system, with 1 more left unreleased, but they all play exactly the same. The console doesn't even display any graphics or HUD on the screen at all. It just counts up your score on a digital LED display on the unit itself. It's kind of like an 80s alarm clock, but less useful.
7 a.m. waking up in the morning, gotta be fresh, gotta go downstairs.
In other words, it's a heap of crap, but somehow I'm really glad that I own it. And I'm really grateful for Larry for helping me finally realise what I've been remembering after all these years.
Oh, no problem at all, Samuel.
I'm pretty sure anyone even remotely interested in gaming is already subscribed to Larry, but you can see his video for more on the Action Max by clicking up here. And you should totally go and get his excellent new book, links in the description.
And I'll see you all next time on Fact Hunt.
Thanks, mate. But yeah, with a home computer which couldn't really play anything but text games, a few seconds limited experience of some early Amstrad and Spectrum titles, and the goddamn Action Max as my only experiences of gaming, it's not really a surprise that by 1988, I'd not really fallen in love with video games quite yet.
Barely even friends.
Quick note, please don't think I'm crapping on the Spectrum, Amstrad or C64, I'm really not. I actually love the 8-bit micros, and we'll be talking about them all in later videos. Let's just say I didn't discover their charms until a few years later than everybody else did.
Bittersweet and strange, finding you can change, learning you were wrong.
So that about wraps that up. Thank you for watching my very first gaming video. I hope it was only as cringeworthy as it was already intended to be. In the next episode, I'll talk about more of my earliest gaming memories, from the Atari 2600, my first exposure to some true 80s arcade classics, the pretty unusual way I first encountered Super Mario Bros., and the mystery game that one glorious day in 1991 changed my life. What was that fateful game? Hit the like button, place your guess in the comments below, subscribe to my channel, and ring that bell to find out.
It's Sonic.
Yeah, that's clearly Sonic, mate.
At least try and blur it out properly, dude.
So, yeah. You want to hear me talk about that? Sweet. See you then. Thank you so much to all the extra special guests this episode. Dan Ibbertson from Slope's Game Room, Guru Larry Bundy Jr, and Timmy Mallet and Pinky Bunky. Follow their channels, Twitters, official websites, donate to their Patreons, buy their merch, and don't forget to follow Pixels.Ltd for more episodes and retro goodness in the future. I've been Samuel Victor. Thanks for having me, and I hope to see you next time.
Please like and subscribe and follow us on Twitter. Thank you for watching.
After 3 decades, I was watching an excellent YouTube video about the worst selling consoles ever, by the gaming legend that is Guru Larry Bundy Jr. Hello, you. That's exactly how he says it.
Can we please not get him to say it? Just have you, like, do a fake voice.
Hello, you.